Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. The Designing Hollywood podcast show is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals. From directors, producers, writers, cinematographers, and of course, costume designers. Designing Hollywood covers some of the most celebrated professionals in the motion picture industry. The show explores the artistry, the craftsmanship, and the stories that bring our favorite motion pictures to life. Today's show is sponsored by the Universal Costume Company. The Designing Hollywood show is proud to welcome internationally acclaimed costume designer Julian Day, whose bold, transformative work has helped define some of the most visually iconic biopics and music-driven films of the last decade. Julian is best known for his dazzling costume designs in the award-winning films Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocketman and Spencer, each showcasing his unmatched ability to capture the spirit, fashion, and psychological nuance of real-life icons like Freddie Mercury, Elton John, and Princess Diana. With a career spanning over 2 decades, Julian's credits also include Nowhere Boy, Control, The Dirt, which I loved, and the upcoming F1 starring Brad Pitt and directed by Joseph Kosinski. His work has earned widespread praise for blending historical accuracy with emotional storytelling, turning fashion into a narrative force. From rock legends to royal figures, Julian Day continues to leave an indelible mark on the art of costume design, and we are thrilled to explore his creative journey in this special episode. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome costume designer Julian Day to the Designing Hollywood show. Julian, thanks for being here.
Oh, no, thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to come onto the show and chat to you about some of the stuff I've done. I had a bit of a smile when you were talking about me. I was just thinking, is that me? I can't believe I've done those things. So, I've had the privilege to work on some great films with great actors and great directors. So I feel very lucky and privileged to have done that. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, you've got a great career, and I have to say, we always like to delve into people's pasts. Like, how did you wind up here? And I found it interesting that costume designers, no one has really a direct path. I mean, sometimes people were dressing their action figures when they were kids. Some people had an academic background. Some people fell into working in theater in college and found that costume design was sort of a calling. How did you find your way into the business?
You've actually mentioned one of the ways I got into it was we had Action Men like G.I. Joes, and
I loved Action Man. It was hard to get them in the States.
Exactly. The same with us. We couldn't get G.I. Joes, but I just they never had the right uniform or never had the things I wanted. So I used to get my mum to make different outfits for them, and again, I've always loved Saturday morning films and just cinema in general. I think I've always loved watching movies, and I think it's a natural progression from really liking clothes to liking movies to wanting to do costume in film. So it just seemed so natural to do that.
Were there certain films that were touchstones for you? Did you have influences? I love that you say Saturday morning film because I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, I also, like in the school holidays, we'd had things like the original black and white Flash Gordon, or Tarzan, or Laurel and Hardy, or Buster Keaton, or a lot of American stuff. And I also have I really like war films. Like the idea of when I was a kid, I was like into Where Eagles Dare, and I remember my mum and dad taking me to the cinema to see, obviously Where Eagles Dare. Not many people might notice, but it had like Clint Eastwood and Richard Burton.
Oh, it's one of the great scores of all time too.
Exactly, and there was this
widescreen epic.
Where, it's and there's this bit where Clint Eastwood's there firing at all the dastardly Germans, and then somebody comes up behind him, and I stand up in the middle of the cinema and shout out, "Watch out! Someone's behind you!" And I was like so into it, and so all of that, and just movies in general. Like I really love the style, even though I didn't realize it, of Laurel and Hardy. and Buster Keaton, there's something about those outfits that are iconic. And in fact, it sort of feeds into what I really like doing now. The idea that they always wore the same outfit pretty much all the
Right.
time.
Almost like a
And I think,
military uniform.
yeah, and I think I worked with a Polish director for quite a few films, and one of the things he always said to me, and he's a very intelligent, sartorial guy, and he was like, "Well, Julian, Homer Simpson always wears the same thing," because I'd be like trying to design, a costume for this and a costume for that, and he'd be like, "No," and then he'd like just do the one costume. And now I like to pare down what I do, find a look, and stick with it. So it plays back to those ideas of Laurel and Hardy and Buster Keaton and those very important integral looks, just that classic look. So yeah, all of that just fed into the idea of, and then I sort of fell into the idea of doing. I was at college and I was really into fashion. I was a goth and I had long black hair and I used to wear skirts and all of that stuff. And I was into like the Cult and the Southern Death Cult and
Yeah, of
all of these
course.
sort of things. And
Love is still one of the great albums of all time.
oh, amazing. So
Love, Electric, and Sonic Temple.
yeah, so all of that, and it just suddenly all melded together, and some, I can't remember who it was. Someone suggested, why don't you do costume? And what I did was there's a great costume hire company called Angels in London, and excuse me, and I went for a job interview, and I just got my degree, and I got a first class honors degree. I thought I was the bee's knees. I thought I knew everything.
Did your
And
degree have anything to do with costume design?
it was theatre. It was actually theatre design. So
Okay.
it was because I think one of the things I also wanted to do was design opera,
Sure.
sort of on that grand scale. And I just got my degree, and I thought I was the best thing. And the first job that I had to do was all the costumiers used to come down to these booths in the basement. It was like in the labyrinth, and there'd be booths full of like dress trousers, and they'd come in and pull out hundreds of them. And my job was to fold them back up and put them back in. So I worked from the bottom upwards, and it taught me a lot. And I really am grateful for working there. Taught me so much. So yeah, that was my sort of path into costume, really.
How did you go? How did you actually start working? Where did you make that transition working from a costume house into the industry itself? Like, did you start on music videos? Did somebody call
No,
you up to be someone's assistant, or?
I was working with this designer called Mike O'Neill, who sadly is not with us anymore, and he was doing this TV drama in Liverpool about it was about sort of the left wing politics in Liverpool in the 80s and the 90s, and it was a TV drama written by Alan Bleasdale called GBH, and it had Michael Palin and Robert Lindsay in it. Oh. So there was like a tiny team. There was Mike, the designer, his wife, and an assistant, and myself. And so tiny team. We had hundreds of extras, and it taught me so much. I had to do buying. I had to do on set stuff. I had to make. There's a scene where there's this Doctor Who convention, and they had these Daleks, and Mike got me to make 2 Daleks with the help of my friend, who now has become my wife, who's also my associate designer. So that was another good route into meeting my wife. But anyway, so making
so
these
you're
Daleks.
telling we have a lot of geeks and nerds, and I like to call them imagination connoisseurs. So are you telling me that you met your wife building Daleks from Doctor Who?
Yes.
Well, you've just given hope to many people out there right now. That's
I actually starred in the TV show as a Dalek. I was inside. So yeah, and then I just started assisting, and I sort of suddenly realized that actually I didn't make a great assistant. I was all right, but I preferred to do the designing. So I just started doing free jobs, short films, and I did my very first big film was this film called Monk Dawson. It was all about Catholicism. And again, I had a team of, there were three of us, and we did, it was from like 1970, excuse me, 1970 through to present day, hundreds of costumes. But again, it's one of those things that really taught me how to deal with budgets, how to deal with actors, everything really. It was a great experience, really good experience.
Yeah, I mean, and I look at your films. I mean, you did some TV, but movies. I love the fact that you worked on. I mean, you're kind of the musical biopic king. Like I'm a huge Joy Division and New Order fan, and you did Control, and I really loved Control. But because you were an old, not I should say old, but a goth, did you have a particular affinity? Were you these projects find you because you loved music already? Or were you interested in pursuing?
No, actually, what happened? I was doing this film with this Pavel, the Polish director, and Anton Corbin came out to do unit. He knew the producer and was coming out to do some stills for the film.
Yeah, I mean, he's did like Depeche Mode, and he's a very famous
Yeah,
rock photographer, British rock
he
photographer.
exactly, and he photographed Joy Division, and so he came out, and it was we were filming in Wales, and it was a really cold, rainy day, and he didn't realize what film sets were like, and he hadn't come out with any wet weather gear, and he came onto the truck, and we loaded him up with wet weather gear and thermals and stuff like that, and we had a really nice chat, and then I got a phone call from him a few months later saying, "Look, I'm doing a film about Joy Division. Would you like to do it?" So I think by providing thermals and wet weather gear, it got me the job.
Right.
But yeah, that was one of my. I have to say that's one of my favorite films I've ever designed. And I think it being in black and white was quite interesting as well.
Yeah, I would
Um,
imagine. Did that affect the way you chose fabrics? And
you know what? Not really, because I'd say a lot of the footage is in black and white of them anyway, and they're
sure.
photographed. So it's all about contrast. But yeah, that was an incredible. I love Joy Division. I actually went to see New Order the first time they played after Joy Division obviously didn't exist anymore. And I saw them in Cardiff, and they were incredible. So it was a really amazing project to work on. I loved it.
Yeah, both. I mean, both Control in America, Control and 24-hour Party People, which delves into the Manchester scene, also depicts Joy Division and New Order, and during that period of time. I think I've watched both of those movies as a double feature 10 times. It's just
That's easy to do. I think the thing that I loved was that I met Tony Wilson, and it's quite funny because again the budget was tiny, and I worked with my wife Shida on it, and we went we went to all the thrift stores in Nottingham, bought everything, but there was this one particular pair of trousers that Ian Curtis wore. Couldn't find them anywhere apart from there's a shop called Marks and Spencers, which is like old fashioned old people's clothes, and we found a pair, and it's the last thing that Ian Curtis would have worn. Anyway, Tony Wilson visited, and he went, "Those trousers are amazing that he's wearing," and we were like, they're from Marks and Spencers," and he couldn't believe it. So meeting him was a real bonus because he was extraordinary.
yeah. I mean, you watch that movie. I'm like, I want to know that guy. We don't,
Yeah,
we just don't have the music scene in America is different than it is in England. And I was obsessed with Factory Records growing up. 24 or 4AD, the 23 envelope design team that did. I
yeah.
mean, I had every 4AD CD, and I think I had every Factory record CD. But there's a lot of things like that they just never released in America. So 24 Hour Party People, I was like catnip for me. And Tony, I didn't know who Tony Wilson was. Other than the fact that he he was the founder of the whole Manchester scene, really, and founded Factory Records. And it was wild seeing that. And I love that film. I dearly love that movie.
Yeah, and I tell you what, he had one of some of the best style. He used to there was this guy run it called Richard Cream. He was really tall. I mean, he was like 6'4", and at that point Manchester wasn't what it is now, and so he used to sell all this Japanese designer stuff, and I used to go into the shop and just look at it. I was no way I could afford it, and Tony Wilson used to buy like Yohji Yamamoto suits in there, Comme des Garçons stuff, and I actually did this other show with him years before. It was like a chat show. He'd interview musicians and stuff like that, and I used to have to go in and iron his suits and steam his suits and iron his shirts, and I was looked at his suits and they were always immaculate. They were so cool. So he was an incredibly cool guy.
Well, when you got to do things like Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocketman, I mean, it sounds like you were the perfect person to do both of those movies. There's obviously so much iconic photography of Elton John and Freddie Mercury and, of course, Princess Diana. When you were working on those projects, did you have a slavish devotion to the reality of it, or did you get a little bit of leeway to sort of put your own spin or flourish, or was it mostly did you want to keep it the way it was in real life?
I think taking Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocketman as two really good examples. I think with Bohemian Rhapsody, there was you can't mess with Live Aid. That's what they look like. And you can't, mess with some of the concerts so I wanted to design the bits that about exactly. So, down to I remember Rami coming to, Freddie's Live Aid look is very simple. It's like a tank top, jeans, studded belt, boxer boots. That's it, really. But sometimes when you get the simplest outfit, they're the most difficult to do because there's nowhere to hide.
Right.
Literally nowhere to hide. I remember Rami coming to me, and we'd had all of this handmade. The jeans were handmade by Wrangler, the boots were made by Adidas, and we made all the tanks. And Rami came to me and he said, literally the day before we started, he's like, you know what? These tanks, I think they're not quite right. They don't fit quite right. I think they need to be scooped out a bit. And it was basically trying to scoop out a tank top will make it just all sag. But I was a bit like, oh my God, what are we going to do? We'd made something like 20 of them, or more just for that one scene, and had to change them all. But you know what? We did it, and Rami was exactly right, and it made him feel better. It made him feel
sure,
because he physically he's a different size to Freddie,
right?
And I think scooping out a little bit here or here or here just made him feel more comfortable, more Freddie-like. So I think those things are really important. And when an actor walks onto set, you want them to feel as comfortable as possible and make sure nothing that they're wearing is wrong or uncomfortable for them. So doing that thing for Rami was really important. A small thing, a big thing to do, but small little changes made him feel really good, and that's very important. But so I think Bohemian Rhapsody was more slavish to what you've got, but there are things designed in Bohemian Rhapsody you had no idea what they're wearing, so you take license and liberty.
Sure.
Whereas Rocketman was a complete opposite. It was all about the idea of not designing it. It was to see Elton's life through sort of drugs and drink and
sure
what he would have imagined, what he saw himself, what the audience would have, seen. So The only one that was the closest one was the baseball outfit, the Dodgers outfit.
Right, sure. Well, that's
Which
so
was,
iconic.
it is, but even so, I designed it with like I don't know, 100,000 Swarovski crystals instead
Right.
of they were sequins on it. So
It was awesome.
it was good. But yeah, so everything Rocketman was a complete redesign, um, which was so I went. Elton very kindly let me go and have a look at his archives, and I went and saw all the clothes he's got. I mean, he's given a lot of the stuff away to charities for charity, and so that some of the iconic stuff isn't there, but there's still a lot of stuff, and it was good to go and see the originals, just to get a feel of what they were like. And there was some really good stuff there. But so yeah, Dexter was like, yeah, come on, let's redesign it. Let's see what it would have felt like, and through a drug and alcohol overdose. And Elton loved it all. He was because he came to visit and I showed him all the designs, and he was really happy with it all. And he said, he sent me some lovely notes afterwards saying, he really enjoyed it, and was really happy with it all. So that was the most important thing for me, to make sure he was happy, because he's an incredible man, a truly remarkable man, and you wouldn't want to let him down, really.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, working with people like Tony Wilson, you'd had experience, but when you're designing a movie about somebody and you have access to the person that you're making the movie about, was that ever intimidating? Was it, or did you just look at it as a resource, or just Elton John's a great
No,
guy? And
no, I didn't. I mean, obviously, I was conscious of who I was meeting. Elton, it's
right,
like one of the biggest rock stars to ever set foot on this planet. So there's always a sense of trepidation. But he was so generous and so kind and so respectful. And he was basically looked at the design, was like, these are great, but do whatever you want. Ultimately, he was really happy. I think he was. I think without with the whole film, he was like, look, this is my life. Excuse me. This is my life, but you go and make the film about me. So it was great. It was great fun to do. Really good fun to do.
well,
I
it
had
shows in the film too. What a
yeah,
wonderful piece of work that is. Again, both Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocketman are just. I saw them both in huge venues with loud, incredible sound, and
yeah,
they're just both great experiences. And taking you also, when you're working on both of those movies, they're period pieces, sort of for the modern age. So every scene, it must have been a lot of fun just to dress everybody in those movies, whether it's
yeah.
the
I
party
love.
scenes.
Yeah, I love the 60s, 70s, 80s. All of those periods are great. I love the 70s most of all. And getting to design film set in the 70s is always such good fun. I seem to have done a lot of that. I did a film called Rush about this is another racing film, in fact.
Yeah, the Ron Howard film.
The Ron Howard film about James Hunt and Nicky Lauda.
Yeah, another
That was
great
set
movie.
in another great period as well, and great fun to do. But yeah, so the 70s is always really good fun, and I like. I've always had this thing about the 70s where a lot of people design. You see a lot of like brown,
Right.
and there was a lot of brown in the 70s, but I don't dress very colorfully, but I love using color in my films.
Sure.
And it always gives me a really good excuse to use lots of color in the 70s, so I'm always really happy to do that. But yeah, the experience of doing all those was fantastic.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, we should be talking more about F1 because I'll get to that. But I just love hearing about people's experience in the business. But it's interesting to me that you did Rush, and then you have done F1 And like I told you, I've seen the first 10 minutes of it. I haven't seen the whole film yet, but it just incredible. But I was going to ask you about both Rush and F1. First of all, F1 looks like it has amazing costume designs both on and off the track. And I was curious, when you did these films, did you have to, I mean, obviously there's sponsors all over the place, and both real, I guess, maybe fictitious too, because F1 is a fictitious movie, whereas Rush was real.
Well,
How do,
Rush. So go
well, how do you, like when you literally have clothes that have words all over them, and the costumes in F1, especially the race, the what do you call them, uniforms? I mean,
race suits. Yeah.
they're incredible. I mean, there's something futuristic. I mean, I'm sure Joe Kosinski, coming off of like Tron Legacy and Top Gun Maverick, they're so cool. I mean, the everything about F1 looks amazing to me. But doing both Rush and F1, how do you begin a project like that? And do you have to clear all this stuff? Do you have to get, I mean, obviously you don't have to clear that. I guess they tell you what has been cleared and you use what the
Well, I
production.
think again, it's quite interesting, the idea of um, Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocketman being poles apart from each other. And the same applies to Rush as to F1, because with Rush it was recreating original suits
Right.
that had the original sponsors. Obviously, the production had to go to all those people and say, "Can we clear?" Some of them they couldn't get, but so those are all replicating the actual suits. Whereas with F1, the production went out and got sponsors, and then um, what I was in so many meetings and talking about millimeters, about the size of fonts and placing and all of those things. So I've never never realized how. I mean, I guess I do watch F1 every now and again. I mean, I do. I used to. In fact, my dad used to sponsor Formula One cars in the 70s.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
and I used to go and watch a lot of races in the 70s. So I've really liked the sport for a long time. But yeah, talking about placings of sponsors on a race suit is you can spend a lot of time talking about it, a lot of time.
Right.
Yeah, the suits. I think it's one of those things when you because when you watch the F1's racing now, some of the suits are quite bright and brash and garish, whereas obviously Joe was trying to create a very sophisticated, almost future-like, look to the whole film, with the Apex garage, the cars,
Yeah.
and the same applies to the suits really. And
It really comes
on,
through.
yeah, I mean, I haven't actually seen it. I can't wait to see it actually. But So with Rush, I got in touch with a company called OMP, who actually made a lot of the race suits for people like Michael Schumacher and Senna, and they're based in Italy. So I would go out to the factory, and they made all of the suits, and everything has to be authentic. It all has to be fireproof,
Yeah.
and has to work for real. And then when F1 came along, I contacted. They're now called the OMP and Bell Helmets, who produce all the Racing Spirit. They're called now. It's an umbrella corporation. But I went to them and we talked about suits and just about, because ultimately you want these suits. The Rush ones were really heavy. They're really, really heavy. Whereas the suits for F1 are so light. And in fact, Lewis Hamilton got to see one of them, and he was like, wow, this is much comfier than the one I'm wearing. So yeah, I think it was definitely the idea of creating a look that was futuristic in that sense, or space age in a sense, but had to look slick, but work for real.
Yeah. I mean, the movie, at least the first 10 minutes that we've seen it's just jaw dropping. I mean, what Top Gun Maverick did for flying, F1 does.
the photography is just insanity, and everybody looks to be having a blast on that movie. And it's a Jerry Bruckheimer production. I mean, I can't wait to see it. And it's not just the way Javier Bardem is dressed. It looks like, I mean, it's also rock and roll, isn't it? I mean, all the glitz and the glamour of F1, and it just looked, the design of what you've done, and the people are just dressed cool, like you can see in the trailer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really interesting with the three lead men. I mean, first of all, who wouldn't want to dress Brad Pitt, Javier Bardem, and Damson Idris? I mean, they're three very cool men, and all their looks were very particular. You've got Brad, who's the sort of the maverick cowboy,
Right.
he was very much into the idea of those sort of 70s icons like Steve McQueen or Paul Newman. Chris Christopherson, he really loved that look. So it's
Yeah.
that we used a lot of denim and suede and cowboy boots and sort of. So he was definitely that sort of maverick cowboy. And then you've got obviously Javier, who's the multi-billionaire, very slick, suits, and we use sort of Gucci suits and Xenia and Tom Ford. Again, Joe wanted this look of sort of very monochrome, and all the suits and ties and shoes would all sort of be very. He wouldn't stand out. I remember Joe saying, "Look, he's got to look like a billionaire. He's got to." And I think I'm paring it down because we tried lots of different things where whether it's going to be handkerchiefs or big watches or big cufflinks, and somehow paring it all down, making it simpler, makes him look cooler. And Javier loved it. He'd walk on set and he'd be like, "Look at me!" It's like he loved wearing it. And then you've got obviously very handsome Damson, who's the sort of young upstart who I wanted to basically make very contemporary and sort of very up to date and using. I wanted it also because obviously there's a parallel with him and Lewis Hamilton, and Lewis obviously is a great style icon and loves his clothes, and obviously his budget for clothes is more than the character that Damson plays. But
Right.
I wanted to use young British designers and young Indian designers, sort of multicultural designers, young up and coming, and there were some great British ones. Like there's a great designer called whose company's called Sage Nation, who I used, and there's a couple of Indian brands I used, and they're really up and coming. There's Kartik Research, so all of those, and I really wanted to make him a real contemporary fashion icon, and he is great to dress. So three very different characters, but all very interesting in their own ways.
The production looked huge. I mean, how much of like the background too are you overseeing? Do you delegate
Everything.
Everything?
I mean, obviously, I can't dress every background, but
Sure.
I've got when I'm generally on a project, I've got about 15 WhatsApp groups. One's for the crowd, one's for stunts, one's for the makers, one's for the breakdown team, one's for the But so we have this one for the background, and they get to send through every single background artist that is. I've seen every single picture of every background artist in the whole film, and to me, the background are just as important as the lead actors because they're setting the picture as well. And so I get to see every single one and say, look, that doesn't work, and because you're trying to create this overall picture of everything, and it's like it's like a painting, and you might at one point want to make the colors brighter or lighter or darker, or so they even on set you have to orchestrate where your background is going to go and help the ads to work out which are the best crowd to go here or there, or all of that. So it's very important. The whole look on any film is very important to me, from background through to lead actors, the stunts, everything really. And I also I have a really good liaison with the hair and makeup team, just
Sure.
so we get those looks. Because F1 is, as you know, very slick, and the look is very, very slick, and there's it's an incredibly um, moneyed sport, and everyone looks fantastic. When you see those grid walks, everyone looks spectacular. So you've got to do it justice. You don't want you want everyone to look $1 million.
Absolutely. Now, I interviewed Jerry Bruckheimer for this show, and I have to ask, only because it's Jerry Bruckheimer, was working on a Jerry Bruckheimer production and working on F1 different than any other kind of productions? Was it bigger? Was it more crazier in terms of scope?
I mean, look, when you're making a film and you're integrating in one of the biggest sports in the world, probably the most expensive sport in the world,
Yeah.
that is going to be different. When you're getting your paddock lanyard that you can walk into, the yeah, it is very, very different. But the same, filmmaking is filmmaking. Whether you're
Right.
making you know a $5 million picture or a $250 million picture, it's still the same in a sense. It's still filmmaking. But Jerry was amazing, and a real guiding influence over the whole thing. I've been watching his films for years. I
Yeah,
love
I was
his
gonna.
films.
I mean, Days of
You know,
Thunder. He's returning to
yeah,
that Days of.
exactly.
You know,
And Beverly Hills Cop.
absolute one of the greatest films of the '80s.
Absolutely. So I love his films and what he's done for the industry. So I was in awe. And he'd come up and we'd chat through stuff. He likes to oversee everything. He wanted to see every costume, every look. He really likes to oversee it, which Joe does as well. Joe's amazing. I don't know how these guys do it. I find it difficult doing my job in one department, but they're overseeing the whole film, and they are so on it. They're amazing. They're really
Well, Jerry
incredible
himself
people.
too has always been a guy who's impeccably well dressed.
He is definitely. Yeah, and Joe as well. Joe's great. He's just like he looks like he's so neat and tidy. He literally looks like he's just sort of gets up and stays exactly. I can put on something new, and in 10 minutes it looks like it's been worn for 10 years. Whereas Joe just looks, and he was actually quite an inspiration for the whole film because everybody in F1 looks so good, and he would always turn up every day looking so good. So and the same with Jerry. So yeah, they were good inspiration.
Yeah, I can't wait to see this movie. I mean, it just for the small bit they showed, it's a visual spectacle, and I got to see it on the biggest screen. I got to see it in IMAX with the loudest. I mean, it looks like what
Yeah,
you want for a summer movie experience, and we're only a few weeks away from it. So
I know.
are you going to go
I,
to? Is there going to be a big like IMAX premiere in London?
there's going to be one in New York actually,
Oh, okay.
and I've kindly been invited to go over there, and I'm doing some talks over there as well. So I'm very excited to go and see the film. But to see it in New York is quite spectacular, really.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
I mean, I love New York anyway. So but I've only sort of been. I mean, I've done a couple of other things over there, but I'm very excited to see it there. I think it'll be spectacular.
I mean,
Um,
another thing, we talking about before we started recording. In addition to F1, you have Edgar Wright's iteration of The Running Man coming out, and again at CinemaCon. They haven't released the trailer they showed us at CinemaCon, but that too is another incredible looking movie. I'm a huge Edgar Wright fan, and it's wild to me that Stephen King, he wrote under the nom de plume Richard Bachman. When I was a kid, I bought the Richard Bachman books not knowing it was Stephen King. I had those paperbacks, and that was the fourth paperback only book that Richard Bachman had released after Rage, Long Walk, and Roadwork. And the movie that they made back in the 80s, Schwarzenegger and Richard Dawson, was very, very different. But I was going to ask you, obviously, it takes place in a dystopian or a different alternate future or alternate present than we live in here, and yet the book has become, I mean, it's almost real now. Everything the book was. And I was going to ask you, there's a couple of influences that I think the book had. There's a book or a movie called The 10th Victim. It's a Franco-Italian co-production with Marcello Mastroianni and Ursula Andress. And and they kind of touched on it for Austin Powers because Ursula Andress had guns in her breast, you know. But I was just curious, like, what were some of the influences that you brought with you in terms of the costuming on the Running Man, and what did Edgar Wright say about that? Because he's a huge science fiction, fantasy, horror fan himself.
John Carpenter, through and through.
Okay,
Escape from New York, The Thing. Also,
that's what I like to hear.
George Lucas's films, early films. I also really love giallos. I love Dario Argento. Sort of 70s, 80s. Obviously, one of the most iconic films ever to have been made, Blade Runner.
Sure.
Because I mean, I love Blade Runner as a film, but when you really look at the clothes in Blade Runner, they're extraordinary.
They're wild.
And
you don't get to really see them when you see them close up, or you see. It's amazing how textured and layered and.
His Harrison Ford shirt is extraordinary. It's just you really don't get to see it in the film, but when you can see it, you're like, wow, that's so. Those were big influences on me. But yeah, so we created this sort of dystopian world where you've got uptowners and downtowners, and you know, most people again would have designed the downtowners all grungy and brown and
right.
But I did them really saturated, really colourful. Sort of the idea that they reuse and remake their clothes and sort of have this quite saturated style, whereas the uptowners, I pulled all the color out and they all become monochrome and one colored and sort of. There's a great designer called Christophe Lemaire, and I love his clothes, and they're sort of very sort of 80s styled and a bit of 90s, but also Americana. I mean, it was I have to say, it was a real treat to do that. I mean, that was extraordinary. We got to do everything. We, some great baddies. Lots of, fetish wear, army wear, everything basically. Anything went as well, which was really good. So I'm very excited about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was one of the great trailers. I didn't know that they were going to show it because they it wasn't so much a trailer as it was a presentation, but they showed quite a bit, and I was very excited. It's, for all the craziness of the times we live in, it's wild to me that I'm getting to see two Richard Bachman books. The Running Man was not, in my mind, in my estimation, it was done right. It wasn't done right the first time. Not to. I don't mean to say, I like that movie. It's a lot of fun as an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, but I don't think it was a great adaptation of the book. And
it was its own movie and not necessarily what was on the page.
When you're working with somebody like Joe Kosinski and an Edgar Wright and Ron Howard, how do you begin your process with them? Do you have conversations with them before you read the script? Do you read the script first? How do you like to start?
I mean, all three work very differently. And I think that's, again, the other thing that, every project is its own project. And Joe's very meticulous in terms of, I read the script and we go through it and then I do fittings. Edgar, we had a week of sitting down and doing a page turn, all the HODs, and we went through the whole script. He storyboards the whole film beforehand, and we go through each individual storyboard and discuss exactly what entails. It's an extraordinary thing. I've never ever done that before, and sort of, and we stick to it, so we all know what's going on. Joe again does amazing storyboards, And Ron's a little bit different. I think he's more of a technical guy. He loves the sort of technical side,
Yeah.
not necessarily the costume side of it. Some of my meetings were walking down the corridor saying, "Hi, Julian," because I've done quite a few films with him. "Hi, Julian," and then I'd be presenting costumes on the day. So everyone works differently.
Sure.
And I think that's that's the beauty of working in film and working with directors like that everyone has their own process, but all amazing to work with. As I always say, I work for the director, so that's my link to the whole film. You get the script, you break down the script, you you do mood boards, you do decks, you send them out, we discuss things, but the minute sometimes an actor walks in the room, it all goes out the window because and they've got their own ideas, and understandably so, because you get what's on the page, but then they have to inhabit that character, and they have to feel that character, and they have to live and breathe that character. So it's very important, as I said before, what they wear and how they feel in that. Like often, I mean, I've worked with some actors that their footwear is the most important thing. They put on the shoes, and then they're good. Or whether it's a hat or a tie, or it's something, and it just kickstarts their imagination. I get great pleasure when an actor walks out of a fitting and says, "I've found my character." So it's always really interesting to have. And going back to the Running Man, great cast. I mean,
Oh yeah.
phenomenal cast, and all very good to dress as well. So I feel very privileged to have done that, and F1 obviously with another great cast, and throughout the whole career really. There's something, when you meet actors, they are a different breed, and they bring something. That's why they're actors, and good actors are, and their personalities, and there is something about them that is enigmatic, really.
And you've worked. I mean, the people that you've worked with, it's a murderer's row are some of our finest actors too. And do you find the relationship that you develop with actors, like obviously working with Ron Howard, you work with Chris Hemsworth on Rush,
Yes,
and
twice.
on I always forget the name of the land. I like that movie, The Heart of the Sea.
In the Heart of the Sea,
Heart
yes.
of the Sea. I mean, he's great. When you work with somebody like that, I would imagine he seems like he'd be a really fun person to work with.
He's great, and I really enjoyed certainly on Rush, because he basically wore Gucci
Right.
throughout the whole film, and we had a trip. We went to the Gucci headquarters and sat down, and they were like, "So what would you like?" And I was like, "Well, maybe we'll have a couple of shirts and some shoes." And they were like, "No, we're going to give you anything you want." And then by the end of the day, I was going through their brochures going, "I'll have that, I'll have that, I'll have that, I'll have that." I mean, it was extraordinary. Never again. I don't think that would ever happen again. But they were quite amazing, and dressing. Chris is great to dress.
Yeah, I mean, he's a fine specimen of humanity.
Absolutely. It was a little bit more difficult in the Heart of the Sea, because all those guys had to lose all this weight.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, the diet they were on was not the most pleasant diet. And you over the course of the filming, they just shrunk so much. It was a tough film to do.
Yeah.
It was a very tough film to do.
Yeah, it doesn't get enough love, that film, but I really enjoyed it.
No. Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, I did too.
And a great story. Really good story, actually.
Well, as we wrap this up, I should ask, what advice? We live in a strange, changing world with AI, and who knows where filmmaking is going to be in 5 or 10 years. But is there any advice you could give to anybody who wants to get into costume design or work in film?
The only thing I'd say is don't be put off by anything. Just go for it. I just persevere. If you're knocking on doors, just and you don't get the first door open, knock on the second, the third, the fourth, and it's about the love of clothes. It's not even about costumes in a sense. I really talk about clothes, because if you like clothes, then if you love clothes, and you want to be a designer, you'll do it, because it's all about clothes and about creating characters with those clothes. But just don't be put off by anything, and just go for it. That's what I would say.
If you could design, is there a movie that you haven't designed yet that you want to do, like a genre of film that? What would be your dream project?
I sort of, I've got an idea. I'd love to do science fiction.
Yeah.
I'd love to redesign Barbarella.
Well, they're doing that, right? Aren't they?
I think they must.
Somebody's trying to do. Man, I would love you to do Barbarella. I mean, that's
I would love to.
That would be that's a great, because somebody was, they wanted to do it. I want to say that like Robert Rodriguez was doing it, and somebody else was going to do it. I mean, they're making Diabolic movies in Italy again. They've got a whole new series, so why not Barbarella?
The other film that I really love actually is Flash Gordon.
Oh,
And I
some of
love
the greatest
clothes in that.
costumes of all time.
Amazing. And I mean, I'm not even sure if you could redesign that, because it was sort of so perfect, really,
Right.
in a way. And Max von Sydow was so good, and but yeah, I think science fiction, Star Trek, something like that would be fun to do. I remember watching Star Trek, the TV series, so you can't really beat those outfits with those little boots and stuff like that. But something like, sometimes reimagining things that are so iconic is always quite a challenge, but quite interesting to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd be perfect for doing but not like, so much science fiction is so drab. I mean, you're talking Barbarella and Flash Gordon, where, or something the Wachowskis did, like a Jupiter Ascending, which I'm an apologist for that movie. I really like it, but it has some really ornate costume design, and same with Valerian. You go to do Luc Besson if he does another epic sci-fi film, like what he did with Fifth Element and Valerian. Those, because that's what people want to see. Everybody's
exactly.
gone so grubby when it comes to sci-fi. And if it sounds like if you could do a Flash Gordon or a Barbarella, you'd kill that, especially with your music background and your goth history.
Exactly. I mean, I think sort of Elton John meets sci-fi would be incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, I hope somebody does that, because I think, that would be something to watch. I think if somebody could nail it, because as a lifelong science fiction film fan, it's almost like there was a lot more diversity, like you're talking about in the 70s. There's a lot of weird, I mean, Flash Gordon was 80.
Logan's Run.
Yeah, there you go. They've been trying to do a Logan's Run remake forever. I mean, there you go. There's the whole city. You wouldn't have to just do it in everybody's clothes don't have to represent what year they are before they get killed the way they did in the original film. But I would love to see something like that. Well, listen, this has been I could talk to you for another hour or two. But I want to thank you for your time. And Julian, you've got Running Man coming out, which I can't wait for. F1 is imminent. It comes out at the end of this month, the end of June. And it looks like the clothing in that looks so sumptuous and just so much fun. And that whole movie looks like it's going to be one of the highlights of the summer. And it'll probably be bigger in international markets, because F1 is sort of not as well known here in the States. But I would imagine that movie's going to make $1 billion playing all over the world.
I hope so. I hope so for Joe and Jerry and the actors, because they put so much work into it. And the guys driving the cars, they were it was extraordinary. It was an incredible experience, and a really nice team of people to work on. So I hope for everyone's sake it does, because it was an amazing movie to make. But a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Well,
for,
Julian,
taking the time to speak.
Julian Day, thank you so much for being here, and thanks for being on the Designing Hollywood podcast. And I can't wait to see the movies you've designed this year. Very, very excited.
Thanks very much. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye-bye.
A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea from the John Campea Show. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at rmburnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at PostGeek Singularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.